The galaxy was a vast and strange place, with countless worlds, countless species, and even more histories. For centuries, peace had been maintained across the stars through treaties, diplomacy, and the occasional battle. But peace was fragile. And when the Cathar arrived, it shattered like glass. The Cathar were ancient, ruthless, and relentless. Their empires stretched across several systems, their technology far beyond anything the galaxy had seen. Their warriors were terrifying, and their ability to invade and conquer quickly made them the most feared race in the galaxy. But despite their power, they were not unstoppable. Not yet. And that was where humanity came in. When the Galactic Council heard of the Cathar's rapid advance, they knew that no ordinary force would be able to stop them. They needed something different. They needed the Deathworlders. The humans were known across the stars as unpredictable, fierce, and completely unlike any other species, while other races in the galaxy relied on technology, or psychic powers, or sheer strength. Humans were something else entirely. They had survived on a harsh, dangerous world called Earth, one that constantly tried to kill them. But humans had survived, adapted, and thrived, becoming experts in warfare, endurance, and survival in ways that no other species could understand. And so, the call went out. A message was sent to the humans. The galaxy needed them. The Deathworlders had to fight. Captain Mia Vance was a seasoned veteran of humanity's elite forces. She had fought in countless battles, seen friends fall, and witnessed horrors that would break most others. But there was something about this fight that felt different. The Cathar were unlike any enemy they had faced before. Their psychic abilities, their advanced technology. It was a challenge that even the Deathworlders weren't sure they could win, but they would try. They'd always tried. Mia stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, humanity's flagship, as the fleet prepared to jump to the Eridan system, the first point of contact. Around her, her crew was ready, but there was a quiet tension in the air. Some were eager for battle, but others weren't so sure. The galaxy was watching, waiting, to see if humanity's unpredictable nature would be enough to defeat the Cathar. "The galaxy is counting on us," Maya said, her voice steady as she addressed her crew. "We've faced the impossible before. We'll do it again." The silence in the room was heavy, but there was a sense of purpose in the air now. Humanity had always been an underdog. That was their strength. The Cathar might have the upper hand, but the Deathworlders were no strangers to impossible odds. The fleet jumped into hyperspace, heading toward the unknown. The galaxy held its breath, and the Deathworlders prepared to fight. The journey to Eridan felt like an eternity. For Captain Mia Vance and her crew, it was more than just the distance between them and the Cathar. It was the weight of expectation. The galaxy was watching, waiting to see if humanity's Deathworlders could live up to the stories of their strength, endurance, and wild tactics. Every ship in the fleet was filled with men and women who had fought in countless battles, but none like this. Maya stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her eyes scanning the stars outside. The ship hummed quietly, a reminder of the calm before the storm. She could feel the tension in the air, the nervous energy of a crew ready to face their first real test. Some were eager for battle, but others were unsure. The Cathar were unlike any enemy they had fought before. Their psychic abilities and advanced technology could be a problem. "We're about to face something we've never seen before," Maya said, turning to Lieutenant Rourke, her second in command. "We'll have to be ready for anything." Rourke nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We'll be ready, Captain." Deathworlders don't back down. The other races in the galaxy had their doubts. The humans were seen as unpredictable, sometimes too wild, too reckless. They didn't follow the rules of war that other species obeyed. But that was exactly what made them so dangerous. The Cathar might have technology and psychic power, but humanity had something else: creativity, adaptability, and a brutal will to survive. And it was this that had earned them their place in the Galactic Council. As the fleet made its way toward Eridan, The whispers began. Some of the other species in the council had their own ships in the fleet, and they watched the humans with wary eyes. They weren't sure what to make of the Deathworlders. Their tactics were unlike anything the galaxy had seen. More savage, more direct. Some had called humanity the wild card, unsure if they were allies or a danger to the galaxy's balance. Mia could feel the eyes on them as they moved closer to the battle. It was as if the whole galaxy was holding its breath, waiting to see how the Deathworlders would handle this new threat. Humanity had fought battles before, but this was different. The Cathar were a different breed entirely. "Captain," a voice called from across the bridge. It was Lieutenant Jara, the ship's communications officer. "We've received a message from the Council. They're concerned about the level of force we'll use in this conflict." Mia's eyes narrowed. She'd known this would happen. The Galactic Council was made up of many different species, each with its own way of thinking. Some would want to approach the Cathar cautiously, with diplomacy and careful planning. Others would argue for a show of force, to make an example out of them. "We'll do what's necessary," Maya said, her voice firm. "We're here to win. And if that means breaking a few rules along the way, so be it." As the fleet neared Eridan, Mia couldn't help but feel the weight of her mission. The fate of the galaxy was at stake, and humanity was about to take its first step into this new war. The Deathworlders had always been known for their ability to fight against the odds, but now it was time to prove it on a scale that no one had ever seen before. The fleet dropped out of hyperspace, and Eridan loomed ahead. The Cathar were waiting. Maya looked at her crew. "This is it. Let's show them what we're made of." The battle for Eridan was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace, and Eridan was right there in front of them. The planet seemed quiet, too quiet for what was about to unfold. Maya Vance stood at the bridge, staring at the planet below. Her eyes narrowed, reading every movement, every sign. The Cathar were here. Somewhere. The battle for Eridan began with a massive wave of explosions. The Cathar had anticipated the human arrival, and they were ready. Ships of all sizes, dark and menacing, filled the sky as Cathar warships launched attacks. The Deathworlder fleet didn't hesitate. They went straight into the fight, weapons blazing, with the kind of aggression that only humans could muster. "Battle stations. Prepare to engage," Mia shouted, her voice calm but filled with urgency. Her crew responded instantly, moving with practiced efficiency. Lieutenant Rourke, always by her side, stood near the command console, monitoring the fleet's movements. "We've got them surrounded, Captain. We've got the upper hand in numbers." Mia watched the screen, her mind already working out the next steps. The Deathworlders' style of war wasn't like anyone else's. While the Cathar relied on precise, coordinated tactics, humanity's strength came from their raw aggression and unpredictability. The Cathar were organized, efficient, but they couldn't predict the human mind, especially in a battle. "Captain, we got incoming fire." Lieutenant Jara's voice cut through the chaos. The Cathar ships had adjusted quickly and were retaliating hard. The Indomitable shook as several blasts hit the hull. A few sparks flew and lights flickered, but Mia wasn't worried. She had been through worse. "Return fire. Don't give them a second to think." She turned to Rourke, who was already pulling up plans for an attack. "We'll use their own momentum against them," she said. "Flank them from the side. All ships, follow my lead." The Deathworlder fleet split into smaller groups, darting around the Cathar forces, using their ships as distractions. With each maneuver, the human ships seemed to pop in and out of space, dodging attacks and striking back with deadly accuracy. It was chaotic, intense, and wild, just like Mia had planned. "Captain, the enemy is falling back," Jara announced. The Cathar forces were clearly thrown off. Their strategy was simple: destroy their enemies with overwhelming force. But humans didn't think like that. Humans adapted, changed, and used every trick in the book. Mia couldn't help but smile. She had seen this happen before. When humans fought, they didn't play by the rules. They made their own. The battle on the ground was no different. As soon as the humans landed on Eridan's surface, they charged straight into the heart of the Cathar position, ignoring the heavy defenses and barriers. The Cathar had prepared for everything except for this. The pure, unrelenting fury of the Deathworlders. They fought without hesitation, using their environment to their advantage. Rocks, trenches, even the weather became weapons. They didn't wait for orders. They acted on instinct, turning every piece of terrain into an ally. The Cathar leaders had underestimated the Deathworlders. They thought their psychic powers and technology would be enough to break the humans. They were wrong. "We've taken the first wave," Rourke called out. "The Cathar are retreating." But Mia knew better. This was only the beginning. The Cathar would not give up so easily. The true test was yet to come. The galaxy had watched as humanity entered the battle, and now the real question was, could they win? Could the Deathworlders truly defeat the Cathar? Mia steadied her breath, knowing that the toughest fight was still ahead. The galaxy had only just begun to hold its breath. The true war had just started. The battle for Eridan had taken a shocking turn. What had begun as a series of quick, decisive victories for the Deathworlders was now becoming a nightmare. The Cathar were no fools. They had expected humanity's unorthodox tactics, and now they were retaliating in a way no one had anticipated. Mia Vance felt the shift the moment it hit. At first, it was subtle, a strange tingling at the back of her mind, like something was not quite right. Then the feeling intensified, and suddenly, every soldier on the ground seemed to falter. "What's happening?" Rourke's voice was sharp with concern as his hands flew over the console, trying to find the cause. It wasn't long before they understood. The Cathar had unleashed their most dangerous weapon, a psychic storm. The Cathar were known for their ability to tap into the minds of their enemies. They could manipulate thoughts, twist emotions, and project terrifying images into the minds of anyone within their psychic range. But this storm was different. It wasn't just a barrage of images. It was an all-encompassing force, a flood of raw emotion and horror, directed straight at the Deathworlders. Mia's mind was suddenly filled with nightmarish visions, dark, twisting shapes that seemed to pulse with an alien energy. She saw flashes of her own past, moments of loss and pain she thought she had buried. Then the visions shifted, showing her the faces of her fallen comrades, twisted and distorted by the Cathar's power. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog from her mind, but the storm only grew stronger. The entire crew of the Indomitable was affected. Soldiers on the surface of Eridan dropped to their knees, clutching their heads in agony as the psychic assault tore through their mental defenses. "This is impossible," Lieutenant Jara said, her voice trained. "The humans, they should be immune to this." But they weren't. No one was truly immune to this level of psychic assault. Even the Deathworlders, who had survived the harshest environments in the galaxy, were struggling. The storm wasn't just an attack on their minds. It was an attack on their very essence, their will to fight. Mia gritted her teeth, pushing through the pain, forcing herself to focus. She could feel it, something deep within her, that unshakable will that had kept her alive through countless battles. The Cathar had underestimated humanity's greatest strength. It wasn't their technology, or their weapons, or even their endurance. It was their resolve. "We don't break," Mia whispered to herself. "We don't break." As the storm raged, Mia felt a surge of determination rise within her. Slowly, she began to fight back. She focused on the present, on her crew, her soldiers, the mission at hand. It wasn't easy, but she could do this. She had to. One by one, the Deathworlders began to fight back against the psychic storm. Their minds were not easily bent or broken, and the storm's power began to weaken under the weight of their resistance. It was slow, but the tide was turning. "We're pushing through," Rourke said, his voice gaining strength. "It's working, Captain. We're not giving up." Mia breathed a sigh of relief, but she knew this wasn't over. The Cathar would be watching, and they would adapt. But humanity had made its mark. The Deathworlders had resisted the Cathar's most powerful weapon, and that was something the galaxy would never forget. The storm was receding, but its effects would linger. The Deathworlders had survived, but at a cost. The battle for Eridan was far from won. But one thing was certain. When the Deathworlders fought, they never gave up. And that alone made them a force to be reckoned with. The psychic storm had left its mark. Though the Deathworlders had fought back with every ounce of strength they had, the Cathar's attack had shaken them. Soldiers still stumbled, dazed by the mental onslaught, and the aftermath of the storm lingered like a heavy fog in their minds. Yet, in the heart of every Deathworlder, there was something that burned brighter than any storm: resilience. Mia Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the chaos below. The Cathar had pulled back for the moment, but Mia knew they were not finished. Their psychic storm had failed to break humanity's resolve, but it had proven just how dangerous the enemy could be. The Cathar weren't just warriors. They were a force that could shape minds, twist emotions, and bend the will of any who crossed their path. But not the Deathworlders, not humanity. "Captain, we've got reports of Cathar reinforcements approaching." Rourke's voice cut through her thoughts. "It looks like they're calling for backup from the outer rim. They're not backing down." Mia nodded, her face steely with determination. "They can bring as many reinforcements as they want. We'll stand our ground." The Cathar had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to learn from their experiences, and to strike back harder. The Deathworlders had faced every kind of challenge imaginable, from the deadliest beasts to the harshest environments on their homeworld. Psychic attacks were just another challenge to overcome. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Mia continued, her mind already working through their options. "They're going to expect us to fall back and regroup. Let's do the opposite. We strike deep into their territory, catch them by surprise." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "A bold move, Captain." Mia's eyes met his. "It's the only move. If we give them time to regroup, they'll only get stronger. We need to take the fight to them." The plan was risky. It would mean sending a smaller strike force behind enemy lines, deep into Cathar-held territory, while the rest of the fleet kept up the pressure. They'd have to use the element of surprise, relying on their speed and unpredictability. But Mia was confident. The Deathworlders had never been afraid to take risks, and this time they would turn the tide of the war. The fleet moved into position, and the Deathworlders prepared for their most dangerous mission yet. Mia knew that every person on the Indomitable, and every soldier on Eridan, was counting on this strike to succeed. Failure was not an option. As the fleet slipped into position, a wave of energy filled the ship's hull. The Cathar were preparing for another psychic assault, but this time the Deathworlders were ready. Maya stood tall, eyes focused, heart steady. She wasn't about to let the Cathar have this planet, not after everything they'd already fought for. "Ready for the next phase?" Rourke asked, his voice calm but eager. "Always," Maya replied. In the heart of the storm, where the galaxy's future was being decided, the Deathworlders made their move. They wouldn't back down. Not today. The battle for Eridan was far from over, but now it was humanity's turn to set the pace. The dark silence of space stretched out before them as the Indomitable and the Deathworlder fleet moved into position. Maya Vance stood at the command center, her gaze unwavering, locked on the planet below and the Cathar forces surrounding it. The next phase of their plan was risky, but it was their best chance to turn the tide of battle in their favor. "We're in position, Captain," Lieutenant Work said, his voice calm but carrying a trace of excitement. "The strike force is ready." Mia nodded, her heart steady. "Let's make it count." A small group of ships had been selected for the assault. Swift, stealthy vessels that would slip past the Cathar defenses and land deep behind enemy lines. They were carrying the Deathworlders' best warriors, elite soldiers trained in the art of unconventional warfare. The mission was simple: strike fast, hit hard, and cause as much damage as possible before the Cathar could react. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon. "We've got one shot at this," Maya said, her eyes focused. "We need to make sure the Cathar can't recover. No second chances." As the ships made their way toward the surface of Eridan, Mia couldn't help but think of the soldiers below, fighting to hold the ground. They were in the middle of a war unlike any they had ever known. The Deathworlders had faced threats before, but the Cathar were different. Their advanced technology and psychic powers made them a formidable opponent, and it was clear that this war would take everything the Deathworlders had. The strike force descended into the planet's atmosphere, their ships cutting through the air like shadows. The Cathar had set up defensive positions around their main stronghold, but the Deathworlders had learned from the last attack. They knew the Cathar relied heavily on their technology, and they knew how to exploit their weaknesses. They had already disabled a few of their key communication arrays, and now it was time to take down their most vital installations. Lieutenant Jara's voice crackled through the comms, filled with static. "Captain, we're approaching the target area. We're going to need cover to land." "Understood," Maya replied. "Hold tight. We'll keep the Cathar distracted." The fleet above began their assault, pulling the Cathar's attention upward. The Indomitable and the remaining ships unleashed everything they had, firing waves of missiles and blinding energy blasts at the enemy fleet. It wasn't enough to destroy them. It was just enough to keep them occupied. On the ground, the strike force moved quickly. They knew the Cathar would have set traps, but the Deathworlders were ready. The soldiers had trained for every scenario, and they knew how to move through the enemy's territory without being detected. They used the planet's natural cover, dense forests, rocky hills, and even the ruins of long-abandoned cities, as shields to hide their movements. With quiet precision, they reached their target, a massive Cathar weapons facility that was essential to the Cathar's control over Eridan. The facility was protected by a high-tech energy shield, but the Deathworlders had a trick up their sleeve. They planted explosives at key points around the facility, ensuring that the blast would be massive enough to disable their main weapon systems. "Ready to go," one of the soldiers whispered, his hand on the detonator. "Do it," Maya ordered, her voice sharp. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave tore through the ground, sending a ripple of dust and debris into the sky. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the Cathar began to react. Their forces scrambled to regain control, but the damage was done. The weapon systems were offline, and their main advantage had been crippled. "We've hit them hard," Rourke said, his voice filled with pride. "The Cathar won't recover from this." Mia's lips curled into a determined smile. "Not without a fight, but we've given them a taste of what's to come." As the strike force began their retreat, leaving destruction in their wake, Mia knew that this was just the beginning. The Deathworlders had struck a blow to the Cathar, but the war was far from over. The Cathar would be back, and they would be angrier than ever. But the Deathworlders were ready. They had proven themselves once again, not just as survivors, but as a force that would not be ignored. And now, the galaxy had no choice but to watch as humanity took the fight to the heart of the Cathar Empire. The battle for Eridan had taken a sharp turn, and despite the Deathworlders' unexpected strike against the Cathar, the enemy was far from defeated. Maya Vance knew this was just a temporary victory. The Cathar were quick to adapt, and they wouldn't take this blow lightly. As the Deathworlders' fleet regrouped above the planet, she could feel the tension growing. The calm after the explosion was short-lived. The Cathar were planning their retaliation. Mia stood at the bridge of the Indomitable, staring at the vast space around them. The stars shone brightly, but the feeling of danger hung thick in the air. Her crew had done their part. The strike force had crippled the Cathar's weapon systems, and the battle seemed in their favor. But Mia knew better. The Cathar were not like other enemies. They wouldn't just give up. They were calculating, and they had resources beyond what the Deathworlders had seen. "Captain, we're picking up strange energy signatures," Lieutenant Orcs said, his voice tense. "Something's coming in from the outer rim. It's big." Mia's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, big?" "It's not just a fleet, Captain. It's something else, something massive," Rourke replied, his fingers flying across the console. "It's approaching fast, and it's unlike anything we've ever encountered." The tension on the bridge was palpable. Maya turned to the view screen, eyes scanning the dark expanse. Then she saw it. A massive Cathar warship emerged from the void, far larger than anything they had expected. It seemed to shimmer and warp the space around it, as if it were a living thing, a beast of the galaxy's darkest nightmares. The ship's structure was unlike anything the Deathworlders had seen, part organic, part mechanical. It was as if the Cathar had fused their technology with the raw, primal power of their species. The Cathar were holding back. Mia muttered under her breath. "This is their true weapon." The enormous warship moved toward them, its weapon systems charging with bright, crackling energy. The Indomitable shook as the first blasts hit the shields. Alarms blared, and the ship groaned as the impact rocked every crew member to their core. The shields held, but only just. The Cathar weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end this. "Bring us to full combat speed," Mia ordered, gripping the armrest of her chair. "Return fire. We need to buy time for the rest of the fleet to regroup." "Understood, Captain," Rourke said, his voice steady but urgent. "All ships, prepare to engage the enemy." The Indomitable veered hard to the right as another barrage of energy blasts came at them. The Deathworlder fleet scattered, trying to avoid the devastating fire from the Cathar warship. The battle that had once seemed in their favor was quickly spiraling out of control. On the surface of Eridan, the Cathar were also regrouping. The strike force that had caused so much damage to their facilities was now deep in enemy territory, but Mia knew it wouldn't be long before the Cathar sent reinforcements to hunt them down. They had pushed the enemy back, but the enemy was far from finished. "Captain, the Cathar are sending boarding pods." Jara's voice crackled through the comms. "They're preparing to board the Indomitable." Mia clenched her fists. She had known this would happen. The Cathar had pushed them to their limit, but humanity wasn't done yet. "Prepare for close combat," Maya said. "Get our defenses ready. No one boards this ship." The enemy was relentless, and now they were fighting on two fronts, space and the surface of Eridan. The Cathar would keep coming, stronger and angrier, but Mia could see the way the Deathworlders were responding. They had never fought with fear in their hearts. They fought with something far more dangerous, defiance. With the Cathar closing in and their assault intensifying, Mia knew the time had come to make a choice. Would they hold their ground and continue to push back, or would they retreat and let the Cathar regain their footing? "There's no retreating," Mia whispered to herself, eyes locked on the approaching enemy ship. "Not now. Not ever." The war was about to reach its most dangerous phase. The battle above Eridan had reached a breaking point. The massive Cathar warship loomed like a shadow over the Deathworlder fleet, its weapons firing relentlessly. The Indomitable rocked with each impact, its shields barely holding up against the onslaught. Inside, Mia Vance stood at the command center, her jaw clenched in determination. The Cathar had brought their full force to bear, but humanity was not going to bow down. Not now. Not ever. "Captain, the outer hull is sustaining heavy damage," Rourke reported, his voice tight with strain. "We're losing shields faster than we can regenerate them." Mia nodded. They couldn't keep up the fight like this for much longer. The Cathar's new warship was more than they had anticipated. It was like a living, breathing thing, far stronger than any of their previous ships. But the Deathworlders had one thing the Cathar would never understand. Unbreakable will. We can't keep dodging. It's time for the final push, Maya said, her voice steady. I need the fleet to concentrate fire on the enemy's core. The Indomitable changed course, its engines roaring as they made a desperate charge straight toward the heart of the Cathar warship. The rest of the fleet followed suit, their ships maneuvering into position to create a concentrated strike. This was a last-ditch effort, a high-risk maneuver that could either cripple the enemy or result in total destruction. All ships, lock on target. We aim for the core, Maya ordered, her hands gripping the edge of the command chair. This ends now. The Cathar warship fired again, but this time the Deathworlders didn't flinch. They pushed forward, throwing everything they had at the enemy. Missiles, plasma bolts, and energy blasts filled the air, creating a blinding storm of fire as the Deathworlders made their final stand. The Cathar warship retaliated with a devastating wave of energy, trying to force the Deathworlders back. But the Deathworlder fleet held steady, determined. Their ships rocked and swayed under the intense fire, but they did not waver. Mia's heart pounded as she watched the damage reports flood in. The Indomitable was losing critical systems, but she didn't care. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. They couldn't afford to stop. They had to push through, no matter the cost. Lock on target and fire. Mia shouted, her voice echoing across the bridge. The fleet fired in unison, a barrage of energy from every ship converging on the Cathar warship's core. For a moment, there was silence, and then a blinding flash of light. The energy from the combined attack overwhelmed the Cathar ship, and the core detonated in a spectacular explosion. The shockwave rippled through space, sending out a powerful pulse that rattled the Indomitable and the remaining Deathworlder ships. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze, as if time itself had stopped. Then the warship's remains began to drift into the void, the once mighty Cathar vessel now reduced to rubble. The Deathworlder fleet, battered but victorious, watched as the final remnants of the Cathar flagship vanished. But the victory was bittersweet. Mia knew the fight was far from over. The Cathar were relentless, and they would regroup. There would be more battles. But for now, they had achieved something remarkable. We did it, Orcs said, his voice filled with awe. We stopped them. Mia nodded, her gaze locked on the view screen. This was just one battle. The war is still raging. But today, humanity showed the galaxy what we're capable of. The Deathworlders had delivered a crushing blow to the Cathar, but Mia knew the real victory wasn't in the destruction of a single warship. It was in the defiance, the refusal to give in when the odds were stacked against them. They had faced the impossible, and they had triumphed. The Cathar might have been defeated for now, but they were still out there, lurking in the shadows, ready to strike again. And when they did, the Deathworlders would be ready, because humanity had something the Cathar could never understand: courage, unity, and the unbreakable will to fight. And the galaxy would tremble when the Deathworlders took the field once again. The silence that followed the destruction of the Cathar warship was almost deafening. The once chaotic battlefield now lay still, with the remnants of the enemy's flagship drifting slowly into the void. The Deathworlder fleet, battered but intact, held position above Eridan, its crew exchanging looks of cautious relief. Mia Vance stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. The enemy had been dealt a devastating blow, but there was no celebration, no time for cheers. She knew better than anyone that victory in a single battle didn't win a war. The Cathar were fierce, and this was just one chapter in a much larger story. But for the moment, it felt like humanity had finally earned a moment of peace. "Captain, we've received a transmission," Orcs said, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "It's from the Cathar Council." Mia raised an eyebrow. It was unusual for an enemy to reach out after such a loss. "Put it through," she ordered. The view screen flickered, and soon an image appeared. a Cathar commander, his face stoic, yet something in his eyes betrayed a hint of frustration. The Deathworlders had delivered a blow unlike any the Cathar had expected. "Human," the Cathar commander began, his voice cold but measured. "You have proven your strength, but this war is far from over. You have merely delayed the inevitable." Mia stood tall, her expression hardening. "We've delayed nothing. We've given you a taste of what happens when you underestimate humanity. And trust me, we don't back down." The Cathar commander's eyes narrowed. "You speak bravely, but you cannot defeat what is already in motion. The galaxy will bow to the Cathar, and your Deathworlders will be swept away. This is your only warning." The transmission ended abruptly, the Cathar's words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Maya's hand clenched into a fist, but she refused to show weakness. She knew what was coming. The Cathar would regroup, and they would return stronger. But she also knew that the Deathworlders weren't going to let that happen without a fight. "Captain, what's our move?" Rourke asked, his voice firm. Maya took a long breath, her mind racing with possibilities. The Cathar had made their position clear. They would not stop until humanity was crushed. But the Deathworlders had proven one important thing. They weren't afraid. They had survived the worst the galaxy had to offer, and they were still standing. "We don't let up," Maya said, her voice full of conviction. "We press forward. The Cathar think they can intimidate us with threats. But what they don't understand is that humanity's strength is not just in our weapons. It's in our spirit, and we will not bow to them." The crew around her nodded, their faces reflecting the same resolve. The Cathar may have thought they had the upper hand, but they were about to learn a hard truth. The Deathworlders weren't just survivors, they were fighters. And no matter how powerful the Cathar believed themselves to be, they could never match the heart of humanity. "Rourke, get the fleet in formation," Mia continued. "We'll take the fight to them. We'll show the galaxy that when Deathworlders take the field, it's the galaxy that holds its breath." The crew sprang into action, the Indomitable, and its fleet moving with a renewed sense of purpose. The Cathar had dealt humanity a hard blow, but the Deathworlders had answered with something the enemy could never have anticipated: defiance. As the fleet prepared to set course for the next battle, Maya stood tall, watching the stars outside. The war wasn't over, but the Deathworlders had made their mark. They had shown the galaxy that humanity would fight with everything they had, and they would win. And as long as the Deathworlders stood united, there was no force in the galaxy that could break them. The Cathar had underestimated them before. They wouldn't make that mistake again. This was only the beginning of the fight, and humanity would be ready.